you're asking me whether to use different names. This is a question about a woman who wants to write a story about your own life, and whether or not to use real names or invented names. It's really it's your call. It sort of depends on the story you want to tell, and if you feel that you'll have more freedom to write the story by using invented names, maybe that's the way to go, but if not, you could use the real names. Well, wish you all the best of it. Let's see, favorite books. I wish I could have a few hours to make up my mind in here. But when I was writing these stories, I can sort of work backward. I was doing a lot of rereading, actually, and rereading authors I'd read before and also filling in gaps. And two of the authors I was reading and rereading a lot were Hardy and Hawthorne. And the title of my book, Unaccustomed Earth, actually comes from a passage in Nathaniel Hawthorne in an essay he wrote called A Custom House, which precedes The Scarlet Letter, which I had read, when I was a teenager, and then reread when I was working on these stories, and was very, very moved and struck by Hawthorne's words, and so I took them, so those are some of the writers I was reading. I love the Russians. That's probably obvious from my last book. So Chekhov and Tolstoy and Mavis Gallant, Edwidge mentioned, William Trevor, Alice Munro are some of the living story writers I really admire. I can't remember if there was another. When did I decide I wanted to write? There was no moment. There was never a moment, never even it was just a very slow, quiet, I would say, for a long time, silent awakening, I think, of that part of me. It wasn't something I ever assumed or dreamed or dared to do for a very long time. And so most of the stories I wrote in my first book, Interpreter of Maladies, I wrote in a phase of life when nobody knew what I was. Nobody who knew me. I think 1 or 2 or 3 people in the world knew that I sometimes wrote short stories on the weekends or something. But even my best friends, my parents, nobody knew that I had this other pursuit. Because I just didn't think. I don't know. I was just very insecure about it, really, just very shy and very nervous, and felt that I didn't have, I wasn't brave enough to sort of call myself a writer or even think of myself as a writer. So it really kind of crept up over the years, and eventually one thing led to another. I mean, eventually those sort of years of secret writing led to stories piling up, and the piled up stories led to a first book, and then from there it moved forward.
After writing these 3 works about the Bengali community, do you ever feel that it begins to feel like an obligation, that these are the only characters that you're accustomed to writing about? Do you ever feel like you want to venture off and write about something totally different that you don't know personally?
This is a question about what I write about and whether or not I feel obligated to write about what I write about, and if I'm ever going to write about something I don't know. And there are a lot of different ways to answer that question. I get asked it a lot because I suppose I do. So far I have written about generally the same sort of world. But when I think about most of the writers I know and have loved over the years, they tend to do pretty much the same thing. be it James Joyce writing about Ireland, or Virginia Woolf writing about portraits of women's interior lives, or what have you. And so I think, yes, this is a world I know, but at the same time, when I write things, I'm going into an unknown territory. Each story is an unknown world for me. It might be something I feel close to, or have a direct access to that world. So in that sense, it's true. But at the same time, I feel that in my writing, there's a lot of thinking I have to do about things like, I once wrote a story about a woman who was 103 years old, and had watched the man land on the moon in 1969, and first of all, I don't remember that moment in history, and I certainly don't know yet what it's like to be 103 years old. So, every time I write, I have to go somewhere in my mind. I have to go somewhere into an unknown world. And so, in my mind, I'm always writing about things I don't know. And I think, yes, the general landscape of my writing is a world that I do know, but within that landscape, I think because I'm simply trying to write about the human predicament, the human condition, and that is an infinite mystery, eternal mystery to all of us, and that's what I'm trying to look at every time I write something.
I actually have one more question by what I think might be the youngest member of the audience. So do you want to?
Was there a book that you read when you were younger that inspired you to be a writer?
Everyone heard that question. And I'll try to remember. Yeah, I loved reading. It's just, I always loved it as soon as I knew how to do it. And I never stopped. So I remember reading the Laura Ingalls Wilder books when I was, 7 or 8 years old, and then trying to write my own versions of those books. So I remember one of the first stories I wrote in collaboration with a friend was about a runaway girl, and there was some sort of horse-drawn vehicle in it. And I wonder where I got that inspiration from. So, but I remember reading those books. I remember reading these shoe books by Noel Streatfeild that I loved. I remember reading The Secret Garden and the Narnia Chronicles, and being read to was also very fundamental. Not only reading myself, but my absolute favorite thing as a young child was when we were called into the library, and the librarian would read something to us, Roald Dahl books. There's so much good, great stuff, and it's one of the wonderful things now about having children of my own, because I get to go back to all of those amazing books from the simplest to now getting slowly graduating to chapters. So it's really fun the past few years. Thank you. You've been such an amazing audience.